The day's news and sport now on BBC Two with Moira Stuart and Helen Rollason.
A massive car bomb in Northern Ireland has killed more than 20 people, including children. It exploded in a busy shopping street in Omagh, County Tyrone. About 100 people have been injured. It's the worst bomb attack in 30 years of terrorism in the province. Police have been evacuating roads around the courthouse after a telephone warning, but the bomb went off several hundred yards away in an area people were being sent towards.
The street where the bomb exploded was a scene of devastation. Shops were blown apart and buildings shattered, leaving people trapped inside. The terrorist warning had said the bomb would go off outside the courthouse, but it exploded instead in the very area police had evacuated the public to, a busy street thronged with people. It was the day of the town's carnival. Many of the dead and injured were standing behind the security cordon erected by police after they cleared the area. Eyewitnesses said it was a scene of carnage.
I counted at least 15 bodies. That's dead, that's not counting the injured. They had to take the injured away in buses, vans, anything that we could get at the time. It's just incredible that could happen today, a day when a festival was to take part in this. What can you say about them? What can you say?
Medical staff at Tyrone County Hospital went on full disaster alert.
We have a number of casualties, dozens and dozens and dozens of casualties in fact. Some are very seriously and very critically injured. Well, really, I think we're talking up on 100, between the ranging from very, very critically to minor.
With the police, army and emergency services stretched to the limit, ambulances and air ambulances have been carrying casualties to other hospitals. An appeal has been put out for blood donors. Linda Duffin, BBC News.
The RUC has set up an emergency helpline for the family and friends of people who may have been in Omagh. The telephone number is 01232 673371. That's 01232 673371. Well, I'm joined now by Chris West, who's in Omagh. Chris, what's the latest you have?
Just in the past few minutes, we've been allowed in closer to see the damage at close quarters. You can see behind me the devastation that's been caused in the High Street. At very much the far end of the High Street, you can see the courthouse. That was the grey building, which is where the bomb was originally said to have been planted. Now, according to local people here, the police moved them away from the courthouse and back down the High Street to where the bomb went off some 200 yards away. The town was absolutely packed with shoppers. It's a normal Saturday afternoon to all intents and purposes, and also it's carnival time here in Omagh, and there were hundreds of people in the High Street, and they were moved to this end of the High Street, and they took the full impact of the blast. And this is why we have such an enormous casualty figure, certainly the worst single atrocity in even Northern Ireland's modern bloody history. A terrible death toll, and from some of the injuries that we're seeing, that it does seem as if the number of dead might well rise.
Chris, amid all of the broken glass and the debris, is there any chance that there are any casualties in that rubble?
I wouldn't have thought so now. If there are still people inside the debris and the rubble, they wouldn't have allowed us in to look at it for ourselves. They've been keeping everybody well back for the last 4 hours or so since the blast went off. It would seem now that they're satisfied that the rubble is cleared. A huge amount of devastation and a very large number of casualties. The police, in fact, commandeered a bus.
What's the latest figures you have for casualties?
Certainly, casualties, they're running into scores of people. There are so many of some of the walking wounded. The police commandeered a bus to take them to the local hospital. That bus was filled twice over, so that gives you just some idea of how many were injured. Now, those were just the slightly injured people, and many more were taken to hospital. I've heard tales of some horrific injuries, and some of those people might well not survive.
Chris West, thank you. And we'll have more on the Omagh bomb later in this bulletin. Other news now, and an inquiry has reopened into the mysterious sinking of the hull trawler, the Gaul, 24 years ago off the coast of Norway. The Deputy Prime Minister, John Prescott, said that new and important evidence had come to light during a survey of the wreck by underwater cameras. Despite a public inquiry which blamed bad weather for the tragedy, rumours have persisted the ship was sunk during a spying operation on the Soviet Navy.
For the families of the Gaul's victims arriving at Hull's Guildhall, this was their first chance to question the Deputy Prime Minister on the findings of a survey he'd personally commissioned. The tragedy of the trawler's been dogged by rumours that its crew were abducted by the Soviet fleet for spying activity in the Barents Sea. In a private screening, relatives of the men were shown underwater footage of the wrecked trawler. Open hatches filled with nets have led some relatives to conclude the Gaul was fishing when it sank. Others, though, are not convinced.
Totally inconclusive. It's nothing I've seen before. Simple as that, really.
So you're not happy?
Not particularly, no.
We were told by John Prescott that there was a lot more information to come. But what we saw on the film there didn't give us a lot of information, did it?
It would be unfair to the people that's trying to help us to start pulling them down now. We just have to wait until the new inquiry is over before we reach any decision or conclusion.
A public inquiry of 1974 ruled the Gaul foundered in heavy seas. Its conclusions, though, were reached without any examination of the trawler itself. The decision to reopen the original inquiry is based on what are being described as significant new findings.
We're involved in assessing why the ship was sunk or why she was lost, and I think the new information we've seen on this film today means that the inquiry did not have all the information available to it. That's the grounds on which I reopen it.
In a community which has harboured deep suspicions about this issue for more than 24 years, the new public inquiry will come under intense pressure to finally establish the truth. Paul Murphy, BBC News, Hull.
It's on to the day's sport now, and with the start of the Premiership football season and the rest of the news, Helen Rollason.
Thanks, Moira. Premiership football got underway today in the most dramatic fashion, and it was a player who made the...
Oh, back to our main story, the bomb in Omagh in Northern Ireland that's left at least 20 people dead. Political leaders here in the Republic of Ireland and in Washington have condemned the attack in the strongest possible terms.
Following the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland, hopes had risen that despite recent problems like the marching season, the province was looking forwards. Today's devastating events have been greeted by widespread condemnation. Politicians across the political divide have expressed their outrage. The Prime Minister, holidaying in France, called it an appalling act of savagery and evil.
I can barely express the sense of grief I feel for the victims of this appalling, evil act of savagery. These lives that are now lost so senselessly, so much innocent blood shed. Our other emotion has got to be not simply one of outrage at the evil of it and total determination to bring the perpetrators of it to justice.
Of course, my heart goes out to all those that are killed and to those who are injured and to their families. This is a tragic day and a very serious bombing offence in terms of anything that's happened over recent years. And the fact that for whatever reason the bomb went off in an area where people thought they were safe in makes it even more devastating.
The Queen issued a statement tonight asking for her heartfelt sympathy to be passed to those who'd suffered in their distress. CAROLYN, QUINN, BBC News.
And for the latest, I'm joined now by Tom Coulter, who's in our Belfast newsroom. Tom, what's been the latest where you are?
Well, we still have at this moment that the death toll is still, we're told, 21 by medical officers down there at the scene. Obviously, some of the injuries, and there's up to 100 people injured, and some of those injuries are devastating. The doctors and the hospitals are describing them as many people are critically ill. So I suppose there is still a concern that the death toll could rise. This is the single most worst incident that has happened in 30 years of troubles in Northern Ireland. We can look back at the Shankill Road bomb, which claimed 10 lives, the incident at Le Mans in 1978 where 12 were killed, and also at Enniskillen where 11 died. This is the worst incident, terrorist incident in Northern Ireland in 30 years of the Troubles.
I hear there's been some very strong reaction.
Yes, indeed. I think there's horror probably is the best word. People are still stunned here in the province. They're still trying to take in the magnitude of this event, this atrocity. They really are stunned. politicians very angry. There's great anger within the unionist community, and I suppose the anti-agreement unionists, who were always uneasy about the Stormont agreement, are even more so now. And I suppose we'll have to wait to see in just a few weeks. The Shadow Assembly will sit again at Stormont, and we'll have to see how the politicians newly elected to that body will deal with this, because it is a blow undoubtedly to the Stormont agreement and the hopes for peace.
And Tom, any indication yet who was behind the explosion?
Not as yet. No group has admitted responsibility, but I think the finger of suspicion does point clearly at one of the dissident Republican groups, probably the one that calls itself Real IRA. That is led by a former leading member of the Provisional IRA, or as we would know it as the main Republican grouping, the main IRA. He left last November. He left the organisation. He was unhappy about the ceasefires. He was unhappy about the strategy of Sinn Féin in the peace process and the talks process, and he has now led this organisation and heads it up. And certainly security forces were saying to me just a few days ago that they were a very small number, but they were becoming more and more concerned that people were moving across to this organisation, experienced people from the Provisional IRA, and obviously they have that experience. They've carried out a number of successful, in their terms, bomb attacks recently, and now we saw this outrage today.
Tom, thank you so much. And of course we'll bring you the latest developments in the main news on 1 tonight at 10:20. From Helen and from me, good evening.